I woke up on my 25th birthday with low expectations. Not because I hated birthdays, but because deep down I'd learned not to expect much. Still, some part of me hoped maybe this year would be different. Maybe I'd wake up to a message in the family group chat. Maybe Mom would call, and then even if just for a minute. Maybe Dad would send one of his awkward but sweet emojis he still didn't know how to use. I checked my phone. Nothing. The group chat was still stuck on a meme Josh had sent 4 days ago. My last message. Can we do brunch this weekend? My treat. Sat there, unread. Fine, I told myself. Maybe they were busy. Maybe they'd forgotten for a few hours. It happens. I got dressed slowly. I didn't have plans that day. I'd taken the day off from work thinking someone might want to do something. But the hours slipped by, quiet and uneventful. Around lunchtime, I treated myself to take out sushi. I even picked up a slice of cake from the bakery across the street. Strawberry shortcake, my favorite. I lit a single candle, laughed at how pathetic it looked, then blew it out alone in my apartment kitchen. At 5:43 p.m., I got a notification from Facebook. Linda tagged you in a photo. My chest lifted for a second. Then I clicked. It wasn't a birthday post. It was a group photo of my entire family. Mom, Dad, Josh, and my sister Heather, smiling around a long dinner table at our favorite steakhouse. The caption read, Family Night. Nothing like being together. I stared at it, blinked, read it again. It was today's date. Today. My birthday. I checked the time they posted it. 5:12 p.m. They were out celebrating something, together, laughing, eating. And I wasn't even invited. Not a word, not a text, not even a fake excuse. I waited for someone, anyone, to realize the mistake. To say, oh my God, we forgot. To call me, message me, anything. But the hours passed. The photo got likes, heart reacts, comments like beautiful family and so lucky to have each other. No one mentioned me. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel shocked. What I felt was something worse. Confirmation. Because this wasn't the first time, it wasn't even the fifth. But something about this year, about seeing them together, smiling like I never existed, made something snap. I closed my laptop and sat in silence. Not angry, not heartbroken, just hollow. When I turned 16, my mom was out of town for a conference. Dad texted me late that night with a rushed, happy b-day kiddo and nothing else. Heather had forgotten completely, until 2 days later when I reminded her and she said, wait, that was this week? When I turned 21, Josh threw a massive party for himself. His birthday was 2 weeks before mine, but he insisted on just doing one big thing and made me feel like a guest at my own milestone. When I turned 23, I invited them all to brunch. I booked the table, picked the place, sent the group text. Only Heather showed up, late and mostly because she was already in the area. Mom sent me a selfie with her friends at a wine tasting. Dad never responded. Each time I told myself it didn't matter. That birthdays were just days. That grown-ups didn't need candles or cake or people remembering them. That I wasn't 5 years old anymore. But it always stung. Because it wasn't about presents or parties. It was about being thought of, being seen, being valued enough that someone paused their day to say, hey, I'm glad you were born. And no matter how hard I tried to brush it off, every forgotten birthday was another quiet reminder that I simply didn't register. Still, I always made excuses. They were busy. They didn't mean to. Maybe I forgot to remind them. Maybe I expected too much. But this year, seeing them together, laughing, celebrating something's anything, on this day, without even noticing the absence of the one person whose birthday it was, that was different. This time, I didn't want to explain it away. I didn't want to find a reason or soften the edges. This time, I let it hurt. I let it settle in fully. And it hit me, harder than I expected. You can only be forgotten so many times before you start wondering if you were ever really meant to be remembered. Growing up, I used to tell myself my family was just practical. Heather had asthma and chronic sinus infections when we were kids. She missed a lot of school, took a dozen different medications, and had to sleep with a humidifier humming next to her bed. Mom called her our little miracle. And Dad carried her from the car when she was too tired to walk. Josh, on the other hand, was the athlete. Football, baseball, track. If it had a team, he joined. Dad was his biggest fan, always in the bleachers, always shouting his name. He called Josh my legacy. And then there was me. I wasn't sick, I wasn't athletic, I was just there. Healthy, quiet, independent. I didn't need help with homework, didn't throw tantrums, didn't beg for attention, so I didn't get any. It wasn't obvious at first. No one yelled at me, no one left bruises or called me names. It was smaller than that. Subtle. Like choosing to hang Josh's trophies in the living room but keeping my science fair ribbons in a drawer. Like taking Heather to the ER at the first sneeze, but telling me to sleep it off when I had a fever. I learned early on that the best way to be loved was to not need love. The quieter I stayed, the smoother things went. And maybe that's why it took me so long to realize I wasn't just overlooked. I was optional. No one ever said it out loud, but it was clear. I was the one who didn't need anything. Mom used to tell her friends, "Leah's always been so easy. She entertains herself. Never gives me a hard time." They'd nod and smile like it was a good thing. And maybe it was. But when you're a child, easy slowly starts to feel like invisible. I didn't throw fits like Heather when she didn't get her way. I didn't chase praise the way Josh did. I just adapted. And if I was hungry, I made a sandwich. If I was sick, I stayed in bed until I got better. I kept my grades up because no one reminded me to, and I didn't want to disappoint anyone, though I couldn't tell you if they would have noticed either way. Holidays were the loneliest. One Christmas, I got a set of bath products, travel size. Josh got a new gaming console. Heather got a charm bracelet and a handwritten letter from Mom about how proud she was of her resilience. I told myself it was fine, that maybe Mom forgot the letter for me, that maybe she'd say it in person. She never did. By the time I was 12, I had learned how to bake cupcakes from YouTube. On my 13th birthday, no one remembered until after dinner, so I made myself vanilla cupcakes with blue frosting, arranged them in a circle, and sang softly under my breath before blowing out a candle I found in the junk drawer. No one joined me. Later, when I cleaned up the mess, Heather walked in and said, "Oh, was it today? Sorry, I thought it was next week." Then she took a cupcake and walked away. Mom found the empty tray the next morning and said, "You're so creative, honey," before rushing out the door with Heather's inhaler. After a while, I stopped baking. I stopped reminding them. I stopped expecting anything at all. But that didn't mean I stopped hoping. I think I was around 15 when she said it. We were in the kitchen, just the two of us. I was helping her prep dinner, chopping carrots while she stirred something on the stove. Heather had just left for college, and Mom was talking about how quiet the house had become. Then she laughed softly and said, "It's funny, you know. We didn't plan for you. You were just late." She didn't say it with malice. It was more like a joke. A passing comment tossed out with the steam from the pot. But something about the way she said it, absent offhand, stuck. I remember laughing too, awkwardly, not sure how else to respond. "Guess I'm the surprises bonus round," I joked. She didn't reply. The moment passed, but the words didn't. That night I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what late really meant. An accident? A mistake? A burden? I tried to shake it off, to tell myself I was being too sensitive. But once the idea rooted itself, it grew in the dark corners of my mind. Over the years, I kept replaying that moment. It explained a lot, didn't it? Why they never seemed excited about anything I did. Why no one showed up to my school awards. Why every birthday felt like an afterthought. Maybe I was the extra piece they didn't know what to do with. The guest who showed up to dinner without being invited. And once you start believing you were never meant to be there, it's hard not to see every quiet dismissal as proof. I tried, though. God, did I try. Straight A's from 5th grade onward, perfect attendance, first place in the state science competition, volunteer hours, P classes, academic scholarships. I stacked achievements like bricks, building something I thought they might finally notice, but the spotlight never shifted. When Josh brought home a C in algebra but scored 2 touchdowns, Dad beamed and called him unnatural. When Heather got a B- in bio but made a painting that won 3rd place at the county fair, Mom baked her a pie and posted the news on Facebook with, "My brilliant girl." When I got a full-ride scholarship to college, no one came to the awards banquet. No post, no pie. Mom glanced at the certificate on the kitchen table and said, "That's nice, honey," before asking if I could pick up Heather's prescription after school. I laughed it off. Again. Like I always did. The truth is, I didn't want a parade. I didn't need confetti or spotlights or cheering crowds. I just wanted to matter. To have someone say, I see you. I'm proud. But the longer I waited, the quieter I became. By the time I turned 18, I had stopped telling them about my accomplishments. It felt like dropping pebbles into a well and waiting for an echo. That never came. When I got into college, I sent the acceptance letter to Mom over email. She replied 3 days later with a thumbs up emoji. When I moved into the dorms, Dad didn't help me carry a single box. By then, I had stopped asking, because somewhere along the way I learned that silence was easier than disappointment. I told myself it was fine, that I didn't need anyone's validation, that independence was power, that being self-sufficient meant I was strong, but it wasn't strength, it was survival. Now, and the cost of that kind of survival is that you start lowering your expectations until there's nothing left to lower. You stop celebrating your own milestones. You stop letting people in. You stop reaching out because history has taught you what comes next. Nothing. So when they forgot my 25th birthday, I didn't cry because it hurt. I cried because I realized I had expected it, and that was somehow worse. I didn't text. I didn't call ahead. I just drove. 3 days after my birthday, I packed an overnight bag and got in my car, heading for the house I grew up in without saying a word. I didn't know what I was looking for. An explanation, maybe. A confrontation, closure, something. Anything. I told myself I wasn't angry, just curious. But I gripped the steering wheel harder with every mile. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was already on. Mom opened the door before I even knocked. "Oh," she said, blinking. "You didn't say you were coming." I gave her a tight smile. Didn't want to ruin anyone's dinner plans. She flushed. It wasn't about your birthday." "Of course not," I said. The tension in the hallway felt thick enough to chew. The air smelled like leftover pot roast and lavender spray. I dropped my bag by the door and walked into the kitchen like I had 1,000 times before. Everything looked the same, except me. Dad was sitting at the table with a crossword puzzle, but the pen in his hand stopped moving the second he saw me. "Leah," he said as if surprised, "you're here." "Yep. Just thought I'd drop by. Post-birthday vibes and all." He cleared his throat but said nothing else. Heather strolled in a moment later holding a mug of tea. She saw me, raised an eyebrow, and said, "Oh, hey, didn't know you were coming." I looked at her for a long second before asking, "Didn't know? Or didn't think I'd care?" She frowned. "What's that supposed to mean? You didn't call, text, and nothing." She shrugged. "I didn't think birthdays mattered to you. You never make a big deal out of them." And there it was, the line that knocked the wind out of me more than any insult ever could, because that was the narrative they'd built, that I was fine, that I didn't need to be remembered, that I was the easy one again. I stared at her for a second, then turned to Mom. "Is that what you all think? That I don't care?" Mom crossed her arms. "You always said you didn't like attention. You never asked for a party." "I was 12, I snapped. "I stopped asking when no one showed up." The silence that followed was brutal. And in that silence, something shifted. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay stiff on the guest bed, my old bed, with the same thin mattress and that awful lavender-scented detergent Mom always used. The room looked familiar. It felt foreign, like stepping into someone else's memory of my childhood. The quiet pressed in too tightly. Every creak of the floorboards felt louder than my thoughts, and I had too many of those already. So I got up, pacing slowly. Then I opened the door and crept down the hallway, past the family portraits, past the living room where Dad had fallen asleep in front of the TV like always. I slipped out to the garage. I didn't have a plan. My body just moved, like it was chasing something it didn't know it had lost. The garage smelled like old paint and cardboard. The light flickered once when I switched it on. Boxes were stacked from floor to ceiling, holiday bins, high school trophies, stuff from when Heather had briefly tried to start a jewelry business. My fingers traced along the dusty lids until I found it. A blue plastic container, familiar but worn. It was the kind Mom used to store old report cards and childhood drawings. I remembered putting my 3rd grade spelling bee ribbon in there. I opened the box. Inside were papers curled at the edges, a few loose photos, and sitting right on top, like it had been waiting for me, was a small leather-bound journal. Brown, cracked at the spine, no label. I turned it over in my hands. It was warm from the layers below. Something in my chest fluttered. I knew it was hers before I even opened it. The way she curled her R's, the slant of her lines. It was unmistakably Mom. I didn't mean to read it. I swear I didn't. I thought I'd just glance, see what it was. But my eyes caught a page near the beginning, an entry dated almost 26 years ago. I'm too old for this. I begged Richard, but he wouldn't go through with it. And Mom said it's God's will, but I don't want this baby. I'm tired. I feel nothing. I blinked, reread the words. Then I froze. This baby. I kept reading. I already raised 2 kids. I just got my body back, my life. I don't want to start over, but no one listens. I feel trapped, and I don't know if I'll ever love this child the way I'm supposed to. The journal trembled in my hands. Or maybe it was me. My ears were ringing. I couldn't hear anything else. Not the fridge buzzing from the other side of the wall, not my heartbeat pounding like a drum. Just those words. I don't want this baby. I flipped the pages wildly, desperate for a contradiction. A follow-up. Some sentence like, but when I saw her face, everything changed. But it wasn't there. Just silence. And more entries about how tired she was, how heavy everything felt, how no one understood what she'd given up, how she resented having to start again when she thought that part of her life was over. She never even used my name. I sank to the concrete floor, journal still open in my lap. The cold soaked through my jeans, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I thought of every time I had blamed myself for being too sensitive, every birthday I'd rationalized, every moment I had told myself, they love me, they just forget. But she never forgot me. Not really. She just never wanted me to begin with. And somehow that felt worse than hate, because hate would have been active, explosive. This was quieter, deeper. A rejection that began before I ever drew breath, and she never told me. All these years I had tried to be the daughter she'd be proud of, the girl who asked for nothing and gave everything. But I'd been chasing something she'd never offered, not because I hadn't earned it, but because it was never there to begin with. And now, reading her words, I felt like I'd fallen through the floor of my entire life. Every memory, every act of obedience, every second spent trying to be good enough, suddenly felt absurd. Because you can't earn your way into being wanted. You either are or you're not. And I wasn't. It took me hours to move, to stand, to even think. I don't remember putting the journal back in the box. I don't remember how I got back to the guest room. I just remember sitting on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a silence so loud it made my ears hum. I stared at my hands like they didn't belong to me, like they belonged to the girl my mother had written about, a girl who wasn't supposed to exist, a decision she couldn't reverse, a burden she didn't want to carry. I used to think there was dignity in being low maintenance, that being the quiet one, the helper, the good daughter somehow made me stronger. But now I saw it for what it was, survival. A strategy I developed instinctively to not make her life harder than she already believed it was because of me. I wasn't ignored because I was strong. I was ignored because I was never truly welcome. And for the first time, all those years of small wounds made sense. The missed birthdays, the way she always seemed drained when I asked for help, the way she smiled wider for Heather's recitals than she ever did at my award ceremonies, the way Dad said, "You know your mom, she's tired," like that was a reason not to notice me. She wasn't cruel, she was polite, detached, functioning, and that was the scariest part, because you can explain away anger, you can recognize open rejection. But what do you do with indifference that's been dressed up as doing your best? What do you do when the thing that's broken you is never spoken out loud? I had always told myself I wasn't trying to compete with Josh or Heather. But maybe I was. Maybe not for attention, but for proof. Proof that I wasn't just an accident someone decided to raise because they didn't have a choice, that I was worth remembering. But now, with her own words echoing in my head, I realized something that shattered me more than any fight ever could. I was never hated. I was tolerated. And that kind of quiet rejection, subtle, constant, never acknowledged, is its own kind of violence. Worse still, I had built my whole life around it. I had become the person they needed me to be, unproblematic, independent, always understanding. I folded myself down into a version so easy to ignore they forgot I was even there. And they called that peace. Maybe that's why they never understood why I cared about birthdays, because for them birthdays were celebrations. But for me, they were the one day a year I thought maybe they'd be glad I existed. And every time they forgot, it confirmed the thing I tried hardest not to believe, that I wasn't supposed to be here. Not because I'd done anything wrong, not because I wasn't enough, but because before I ever had a chance to be anything, someone had already decided I was too much, too inconvenient, too late, too unwanted. And somehow, I had spent my whole life apologizing for that. I looked out the window. The yard I'd played in as a kid was empty now, the tire swing gone, the grass patchy, the fence leaning slightly. Everything looked smaller, faded, just like my memories. It was strange how grief could creep in even when you weren't mourning a person, but a possibility, a version of your life that never existed. I wasn't grieving the mother I had. I was grieving the mother I thought she might become if I just tried hard enough. But no amount of straight A's, no perfect attendance, no obedient silence was ever going to rewrite the fact that I had been unwanted from the beginning. And knowing that, it didn't make me angry. It made me free. I didn't bring up the journal, didn't slam it down on the kitchen table or throw accusations across the room. I didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't ask, "Why didn't you love me?" Because I already knew the answer. The next morning I packed my bag before anyone woke up. I folded my clothes neatly, zipped my backpack, and looked around the guest room one last time. My old room. The place I used to imagine was home. There was nothing left to say, nothing I needed to hear. I left a note on the nightstand. Not dramatic, just a quiet line. "Thank you for letting me stay." It felt appropriate, distant, civil, like we always were. By 8 a.m. I was back on the road. The sunrise was behind me, and so was that house. For a while I drove in silence. No music, just the hum of the highway and the steady rhythm of my heartbeat. And somewhere in that quiet I realized I didn't feel broken. I felt clean, like someone had wiped the fog off a mirror I'd been staring into my whole life. That night, from the safety of my apartment, I opened my laptop and wrote an email. It was short. Director. No anger, no begging, just the truth. Subject: I'm stepping back. Mom, Dad, Josh, Heather, I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for me, and also let you know I won't be coming around for a while. Maybe not again. You don't have to love me, but I don't have to stay where I'm not wanted. I've spent most of my life trying to take up less space, hoping one day I'd earn yours. I think I'm done trying. Take care, Leah. I hovered over the send button for a full minute before clicking it. Then I closed the laptop, exhaled, and stood up. It was the first time I'd chosen myself. And it wouldn't be the last. It didn't take long for them to respond. Mom's email came first, exactly 17 minutes after I sent mine. The subject line read, "This isn't like you. Leah, I don't understand where all this is coming from. And you've always been so independent, so strong. I thought that's what you wanted. To not be fussed over. If you felt left out, you should have said something. I'm sorry you feel that way, but please don't rewrite history. You weren't unwanted. Things were just different back then. The economy, my health, your dad working long hours. It was a hard time. I was overwhelmed. But I always tried my best. Maybe not perfectly, but I tried. We're your family. We love you. Let's not blow this out of proportion." I read it 3 times. Not once did she acknowledge forgetting my birthday. Not once did she mention the journal. She didn't deny what she had written years ago. She just shifted it, placed it in the context of circumstance, stress, her own fatigue. She had framed my pain as a misinterpretation of her struggle. And then came the line that stung the most. "I'm sorry you feel that way." Not, "I'm sorry I hurt you." No ownership, no real remorse. Just a polished deflection in pastel tones. I didn't reply. A few hours later I got another email. This one from Dad, or at least from his account. It was the exact same email Mom had sent, forwarded with no edits, no subject line, no personal message, just his name at the bottom. It felt like he had signed off on someone else's version of the truth. Again. Later that night, Heather texted, "Wow, an email? Really? You've always been a little too sensitive, but this is next level. You're acting like we abused you or something. It's exhausting, Leah." And just like that, the narrative was complete. I wasn't hurt. I was dramatic. I wasn't forgotten. I was difficult. I wasn't rejected. I was making it all up. They had always been good at keeping things tidy, at rewriting memories to make themselves look generous and me look ungrateful. But I was done playing that role. I didn't respond to any of them. Because for the first time in my life, silence was no longer a punishment. It was my boundary. I moved out within a month. Found a tiny 1-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city. Nothing fancy. but it had its big windows and morning light that spilled across the kitchen floor. It was quiet, and for once, that quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt mine. I started therapy. It was awkward at first. I didn't know where to begin, what counted as trauma, when no one ever raised a hand or raised their voice. Just a lifetime of not being seen, not being celebrated, not being chosen. But slowly, I started to unravel the threads. I began to understand that being emotionally neglected didn't make me weak or dramatic. It made me human. I learned that minimizing pain doesn't make it disappear. It just makes it harder to name later. And then, by chance, or maybe timing, I bumped into someone I hadn't seen since college. His name was Ethan. We'd had a few classes together. We weren't close, but I remembered him as quiet, thoughtful, the kind of guy who didn't interrupt, who listened with his whole face. He recognized me first, at a bookstore of all places. I was thumbing through a copy of Women Who Run with the Wolves, and he said, "That one cracked me open in the best way." We talked for 10 minutes that turned into an hour. He asked how I'd been, and I told him, truthfully, shockingly truthfully, that I was in therapy and trying to figure out who I was without all the noise. He didn't flinch, just nodded and said, "Yeah, me too." We started meeting up. Not dates, just walks, coffee, occasional texts that turned into daily check-ins. It wasn't fast or fiery. It was gentle, steady, easy in a way nothing had ever been. He never asked me to explain myself, never asked why I didn't talk about my family. He just made space for whatever I wanted to say, and left silence when I didn't. One evening, after we watched a film at a tiny art house dirty theater, he turned to me and said, "I like being around you. You don't perform, you're just real." I didn't know how to respond. I had spent my whole life performing, smiling when it hurt, shrinking myself to avoid rejection, overachieving to earn affection. I didn't know who real was, but he said it like I already was her. That night I went home and cried. Not because I was sad, because for the first time in my life I felt seen. Not as a burden, not as a symbol of someone else's regret, not as the background character in someone else's story. Just me. Leah. And that was enough. He didn't fix me. I didn't fix him. That wasn't the point. We didn't need to be whole to be worthy. We just walked beside each other, slowly, quietly, willingly. And in that space, between silence and presence, I started to believe that I wasn't too late, or too much, or too anything. I was just someone trying to heal. And I wasn't doing it alone anymore. It's been almost 2 years since I left. I live in a quiet apartment on the 3rd floor of a weathered brick building. The paint on the stair railings is chipped, and the heater makes strange noises in the winter. But the windows open wide in the spring, and the light pours in every morning like an unspoken promise. I work at a community center now. I help organize programs for kids, mostly after-school tutoring and weekend workshops. It's not glamorous, and it's definitely not high-paying, but it's steady, meaningful, real. Sometimes I see parts of myself in those kids. The ones who sit quietly in the back, pretending they don't care when someone forgets their name. The ones who say, "I'm fine," before anyone even asks. I talk to them gently. I remember their birthdays. I make sure they're seen. I don't tell them my story. I don't need to. They feel it, and sometimes that's enough. On weekends, I bake again. Not cupcakes from a box, but little things. Banana bread, blueberry muffins, cinnamon rolls from scratch. It's a small act of care just for me. No one forgets. No one ignores. Because I'm here, and I choose myself. Ethan and I still walk together. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we don't. But he always shows up, rain or shine, with that steady presence that never asks for more than I'm willing to give. He doesn't complete me. He meets me, exactly where I am. And that's more than enough. There are still hard days, moments when the silence of my family echoes louder than I expect, times when I wonder if they ever think of me, if they ever feel the weight of everything they chose not to say. But those moments pass, because now I don't live waiting for a call that never comes. I don't build myself around people who need me to be invisible to feel comfortable. I'm not wealthy, I'm not wildly successful, but I'm free. And after everything, that's the kind of rich I never knew I was allowed to want. My birthdays are different now. There's no big party, no streamers or surprise cakes. Just me, maybe a few close friends, some music, a homemade lemon tart with too much zest, and a candle that melts sideways. But every year, I light that candle with intention. Not to make a wish, not to hope someone else remembers, but to remind myself that I remember, that I'm still here, still growing, still mine. Last year, a letter came in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable, elegant cursive I'd traced 1,000 times as a child, usually on permission slips or birthday cards sent to other people. There was no return address. Inside, the card read, "I hope you're doing well. I know things were never perfect between us. I didn't always say the right things, and I know I hurt you even if I didn't mean to. I just wanted you to know I think about you. I hope you're happy." Mom, it wasn't a real apology. Not really. There was no mention of what she had written in that journal. No accountability, just vague regrets coded in politeness. But I didn't tear it up. I didn't cry either. I just placed it in a drawer and closed it gently. Because I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting for the words she'd never say. I wasn't holding my breath for a version of her that didn't exist. I didn't need closure. I had built my own. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't always about telling someone it's okay. Sometimes it's about releasing yourself from the burden of carrying what they refuse to own. I don't hate her. But I also don't owe her my return. And I don't need her to forgive me, because I never did anything wrong, except survive the way I had to. That's the thing no one tells you about growing up in a family where love feels conditional. You spend so long trying to earn it that you forget it was supposed to be yours by default. But I remember now. I remember me. And that's more than enough. Sometimes I still wonder what she thinks when she passes my old room, whether she looks at the empty walls and remembers who used to sleep there, or if she's relieved the quiet finally came back. But that's no longer my burden to carry. I don't need her acknowledgement to validate my experience. I don't need her love to prove I'm lovable. I've spent enough years shrinking myself to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. That version of me doesn't exist anymore. Because now I know the truth. I am not a mistake. I am not a burden. I am not someone who should have been erased before arrival. I'm just a child who wasn't expected, but that doesn't mean I wasn't worth loving. And I still am. It took years to say that sentence without choking on it, but I can now. And I do, because healing isn't about pretending it didn't happen. It's about making peace with what did, and choosing not to let it define the rest of your life. Being born into a family doesn't guarantee belonging. Love that comes with conditions isn't love. It's control dressed in tradition. Sometimes the people who raise you never truly see you, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop begging to be chosen and choose yourself instead. Family isn't made of blood, obligation, or guilt. It's made of recognition, of presence, of choice. You deserve to be loved not for what you offer or how little you ask, but simply because you exist, and that is reason enough.